now the moment comes when the two crews come to the water, and Cambridge are coming out. It's Oxford coming out first, I beg your pardon. And Albert Andrews leads the way, the veteran boatman of Oxford University, who retires this year after 35 years with the Oxford crews. So the challengers take to the water. Conditions here at Putney, not bad at all. Although, interestingly enough, the water on the Middlesex side is beginning to get a little white and choppy, and that's the side that Oxford have chosen to row. So the Oxford boat safely in the water, and the 8 oarsmen return to the oars. Well, Oxford have had a lot of trouble in their preparation, as we shall be hearing later, and it remains to be seen now whether the almost brutal changes in the seating positions a week ago have taken good effect. Wholesale changes last weekend, but all the experts on the tideway here say that the changes have made a good deal of difference. Bowman is Hugh Pelham, who rowed in the winning ISIS 8 last year in the reserve crew, rowed number 3 then, now rows bow here. Former junior international, lives at Henley, reading engineering. At 2 will be now the only American in this boat, Peter Gish. And he occupies the seat, number 2, that all the trouble was about at Oxford earlier this year. A postgraduate, a karate expert, and reading law. Peter Gish. Here's a shot from our helicopter overhead, our heli-telly, as we call it. Rowing at 3 for Oxford, Tony Ward, who stroked ISIS to victory last year. The lightest oarsman in the Oxford boat. The young man, Great Britain Youth International, and reading philosophy, politics, and economics. The reserve race is underway. Chris Bailey is with me. Who are favourites for this, ISIS or Goldie, Chris?
This is Goldie's race on the form we've got so far, but they're already in some rough water, and you can see the sort of problems that the boat race crews are going to face right through this race.
So the reserve race underway. Now, at number 4, Paul Gleeson from St Martin's School, Brentwood, and Hertford College, from a comprehensive school, and had never rowed until he went up to Oxford only 17 months ago. He's one of the people who's been moved in this boat. He was rowing at stroke. He's now seated at number 4. He reads engineering. And then at 5, we have Richard Hull from Wyndham College, Robinson College, Cambridge, a Cambridge graduate, as a matter of fact, but now at Oxford, taking a doctorate in biochemistry. He's had some trouble in the preparation. He's had flu and a back strain, so Richard Hull has had a few problems at number 5. And then at 6, the man you saw winning the toss for Oxford, their president, Donald MacDonald, 31 years old, the oldest boat race oarsman ever, a father of 3, lives in Oxford, and of course he's the man who's had to deal with all the trouble that Oxford have had these last few months. Donald MacDonald, the oldest man ever to row in the boat race. And then on bow side, at 7, very interesting oarsman indeed. At 7 will be Tom Caddo-Hudson, who is on a medical course at Oxford, a former London University oarsman, extremely well known and extremely talented. And he'll be occupying seat number 7. Here he comes. And he moved up from 5 in that those wholesale changes a week ago. And expert opinion is that by putting Caddo-Hudson at 7 and a new stroke, there's been considerable improvement in the boat. Cambridge too have now floated their boat. And now finally, among the oarsmen, the stroke, huge man, giant of a man, Gavin Stewart, 6 feet 8 inches tall, 16.5 stone he weighs. He's both the heaviest and the tallest man ever to row in the boat race. And he was moved to stroke from the number 6 seat a week ago. And interestingly enough, the same thing happened to him last year in the reserve race. He was moved to stroke at the very last minute in the ISIS boat, and that brought about an ISIS victory. So will something similar happen perhaps this year? Gavin Stewart lives at Bournemouth, reading American history. And finally, Cox, Andy Lobenberg, Shrewsbury and Balliol. Oh, and he's got a mascot attached to his hood. Andy Lobenberg, who coxed ISIS to victory last year. Lives in Shrewsbury and reading philosophy, politics and economics. And that's the message to the Oxford crew: go for it. So the Oxford crew are afloat. Now we can have a look at last year's winners. Cambridge, who broke that sequence of 10 Oxford victories. Much lighter crew, Cambridge, than Oxford. There's a considerable difference. The average difference per man is £9. Oxford are heavier by £9 per man, and that is a lot. And the history of the boat race tends to show that heavier crews beat lighter crews. But this year, the equation is rather different. A lot of big men in the Oxford boat, but a lot of very experienced men in the lighter Cambridge boat. And for those of you who may have joined us a little late, let me tell you that Donald MacDonald, the Oxford president, won the toss and decided to choose Middlesex, which is the station that has the early bend advantage. Now, Cambridge. At bow, Ian Clark, occupying the same seat as he did in this boat last year, a member of Great Britain's National 8, and the lightest oarsman in either boat at 12 stone 6.5. He's reading veterinary medicine. Ian Clark. At 2 is Richard Spink, who has had a few injuries to cope with on the way to this boat race. Calf and ankle injuries, a cyst behind the knee, none of which has helped, been out of the boat quite a bit. Richard Spink reading law. He comes from Sherborne School, where in fact they don't row. Number 3 is already seated. Number 3 is Nick Grundy from St Edward's School, Jesus College, who rowed bow for the reserve Goldie crew last year. Former junior international, reading archaeology and anthropology. Seated at 4 already, we have Matthew Britton, who is only 18.5 years old and is the youngest boat race oarsman ever. A freshman, a very experienced junior oarsman, world junior silver medalist. And again, he is a man who's been moved from his original seat. He was at stroke until last week. Now he's been moved back to 4, reading geography. And then at 5, we shall have the president, Stephen Peel, who is in the blue boat for the 3rd year running. Stephen Peel, his 3rd boat race, always rowing at number 5. Again, a member of Britain's National 8, lives in Chester, reading land economy. And then at 6, the only American in the Cambridge boat, Jim Pugh, who rowed at 4 last year and moved to 6 only last week, again in a Cambridge shuttle. He's had some problems, illness problems. He's been down with chickenpox. He, in fact, rode stroke for a time in the build-up, but now at number 6, comes from Gladwin, Pennsylvania, reading law. And then at 7, another freshman, but an international oarsman, Jim Garman from Shrewsbury and the Lady Margaret Boat Club, Again, a man who's been suffering with illness in the build-up. He's been down with chickenpox and out of the boat for some time. So Cambridge have had their problems. This is Garman from Shrewsbury, only 19. And then at stroke, another former member of this crew, Paddy Broughton, in his third consecutive boat race. He's been all around the boat in the actual race. He rode at 4 in 85, he rode at 6 last year, and this year he's stroking the boat, and he moved from 6 to the 2-stroke seat only last week. Again, a member of the National 8. And Cox is Julian Wolfson of Eton and Pembroke, who pipped Simon Loveridge for the Cox's place. And that little pipe you can see beside him is in fact part of the electrical pumps that Cambridge have cautiously placed in their boat. So Cambridge move away. Well, now above Hammersmith Bridge, the other race is now taking place, of course, between Isis and Goldie, and our shots will show you that it is pretty rough above Hammersmith Bridge. Now there's a west-southwest wind. This is where they hit it head-on for the first time. Chris Bailey, this looks rather nasty.
Yes, this is obviously very rough, and we can show that the advantage that Isis have managed taking on the Surrey side. They've held that initial Middlesex bend, and they're fighting Goldie off, and both crews are now moving into heavy water. At the moment they're clearing it quite well.
Considerable difficulties for these oarsmen on this stretch of the river.
We can see now that Isis are pulled well over under the bank. They're looking for the maximum protection, and they seem to have a lead of some 3/4 of a length from the Goldie crew. The Goldie at this stage have got to stay as close tucked into that shore as they possibly can so that they don't take on board too much water. They too are carrying an electrical pump in the hope that they can clear any water that comes into the boat, but nothing will stop the really big waves if they should actually meet any around this bend.
Well, clearly, we can already see from those shots from Chiswick Reach that conditions are pretty rough, and consequently, the control of this race is going to be absolutely vital. And it's in the hands this year of Colin Moynihan, the former Oxford Cox, now an MP, and after the toss, Des Lynham had a word with him.
Your first tilt at the umpiring business for the great occasion. I suppose you'll take no truck from them out there today.
Absolutely none whatsoever, especially in these conditions. One's got to be really quite rigorous about exactly how we're going to run this race today.
Yeah, of course you're well experienced as a Cox yourself. When was it? Yeah. 10 years ago, wasn't it? Yeah.
Was, actually, yes. It seems even longer. But that's when I started off with Oxford and then went on to the squad and had a good run with them, fortunately.
Difficult to be impartial today?
No, no difficulty at all. I mean, I'm really keen to make sure this is a very fair race and that the best crew win. And I'm obviously very concerned about the conditions.
Right. After the toss, you had a little word with the boys. What,
yes.
What sort of things do you say to the presidents?
Well, there are a number of slight amendments to the rules that I've put to them today. For example, if there is one crew that sinks, I think the other one should be able to take cover and not have to go through the centre arch at Barnes Bridge. This is purely safety reasons. I made it very clear to them that if the conditions are very bad on the start, I won't start the race. Safety must be paramount. And they have trained for a very long time. We must put the sportsman's interest first.
Yeah. How do you feel about it just at this moment?
Not too bad. It's marginally better than I would have anticipated. I hope we're going to get it off. Yeah. But the tide is just turning, so we've got to wait and see what happens when we get wind against stream.
Can I reflect back for a moment to 1977 when you steered Oxford to victory by 7 lengths and had a bet on it, I believe, that you would win by 7 lengths?
I did indeed. I nipped up to the bookies just beforehand, and it was remarkably fortunate because it's impossible for the leading Cox to see how much you've won by. That's more determined from what goes on behind. So I won a few bob on that occasion.
Great judgment, then. You'll need it today, too.
I think I might need a little bit of it, yes.
All right,
many
Colin,
thanks. Thank you.
Well, now at this point, the crews have paddled down towards Putney Bridge, and looking out from our commentary box and looking at the sky, there's a very, very ominous black sky coming our way. That's Hammersmith Bridge through the spots of rain on our camera. And the sky is indeed ominous, and I should think there's every chance we might get a downpour within the next 10 minutes, which won't add to the pleasure of the cruise, I can tell you. And the wind, I think, is getting up, and in fact it's it's getting towards the northwesterly position, which is known, of course, always here as the sinking wind. Now, if that wind comes from the northwest, it's going to hit the tide head-on at the start of the race, which will make the conditions extremely dangerous. Now, this year's race, of course, hit the national headlines very early on this year. There was a lot of trouble with the Oxford crew, and it all came about because of what happened in last year's race.
After 10 consecutive defeats, Cambridge took to the Thames last year without public bravado, but nursing a deep collective conviction that a decade of embarrassment was more than enough. And so it proved. After keeping Oxford waiting at the start, they left them trailing at the finish.
You can hear the applause as Cambridge approached the finish with a very impressive margin. They've won it, and they've won it by a long way, and they've won it deservedly.
The boat race has no compromises, no partial satisfactions. It has winners and losers. Oxford reacted to defeat by building their 1987 crew around 5 world-class Americans. But last month it became clear that the Oxford squad weren't all pulling together. Centre of the row was Chris Clark.
There is major disagreement over how the crew has been run and the fairness of it, and that's really the bottom line, just fairness. People questioning whether or not it's really worth rowing in anything if you have to compromise your principles to do so.
Clark was left out and the Yanks closed ranks. Oxford's president, Donald MacDonald, called up the reserves. Chief coach Dan Topolsky defended the decision.
Well, it's become now a matter of who actually chooses the boat, whether it's the selectors who choose the boat or the players. But it's got more to it, I think, than that, and it runs back over this year. And it's partly the price you pay for losing the boat race after 10 years, because all sorts of doubts creep in and people are not sure about whether we're doing the right thing. And that, coupled with a strong cabal of experienced people, so that everybody knows a bit about it and everybody has an answer, that's made the whole year quite argumentative and difficult, and we've had a series of problems right through the year. So I think that's really the basis of it.
In the aftermath of the crisis on the Isis, not even a new sterling silver trophy from the sponsors seemed to lighten Donald MacDonald's outlook. Equally solemn was Stephen Peel, the Cambridge president, though with less reason. His squad's preparation, based on the schedule that brought an end to the dark blue decade, has gone well. The only disruptions have been caused by the inevitable winter ailments, but better to catch germs than throw tantrums. Peel himself will be one of 4 old blues in the Cambridge boat, men who know the exhilaration of rowing to the point of exhaustion and still feeling as though they are flying.
Well, now, the day itself, the big test, and the news from the reserve race is that it is a very close one indeed, and here is the proof. Now then, they're reaching the second half of the race at this point, and there's not a lot between them, Chris.
No, very exciting race, and proving what is often the case, Isis and Goldie races are often more exciting than the main thing. But here we've got Goldie, who've stayed close alongside Isis throughout that long bend, and are now approaching Barnes Railway Bridge. After Barnes, the bend will turn in favour of the Goldie crew. So they've hugged the bend all the way around Surrey, and now they're approaching Barnes, and they will have what is in effect about a half to two-thirds of a length advantage during the last 3 minutes of the race.
Well, if the main race is as exciting as this one is proving to be, then we should all be very happy. But the conditions here at Putney, we're looking at under the span of Barnes Bridge at the moment for this reserve race, but here at Putney conditions are worsening by the moment. There's a squall coming across the tideway here. But what a race these two crews are having. They will shoot the central span of Barnes Bridge, as the main crews will have to. That's one of the rules of the race. And these two crews now very dangerously close together.
In fact, I think there was almost a clash there. To steer these two boats through the central arch of Barnes Bridge alongside one another is very difficult for a cox. And both crews have gone through here, and I think Goldie have taken a lead now. Looks like about a third of a length. And Goldie will be looking through this last 3 minutes of the race to try and take advantage of the final bend. And pulling out to nearly half a length. Isis stroking slightly higher, trying to hold on to Goldie. It's been a tremendous battle, this, and look at the waves. And by the time the main boat race gets here, we can expect these conditions to be, if anything, a little worse. Goldie are hugging the inside shore again, trying to look for a little smoother water. Oars flying around in the water, the waves make it very difficult to get the blades in and out of the water as accurately as the oarsman would like.
About half a mile or so to go now. And looks as though Isis may have made a little spurt there. Chris, they look a little
I think
closer.
so. They're having a lot of trouble controlling their blades. It's not the best water to try and spurt in. The name of the game really is to keep rowing as precisely and evenly as possible and not to hit too many waves. Looks to me now that Goldie are pulling further away. They've probably got nearly a length, taking advantage of that bend, perhaps making less heavy weather of that rough water. One can see that here they come round the final bend. Isis now got to make a final effort if they get back on terms in the last straight. And Goldie seemed to be sitting on approximately 3/4 of a length, maybe a little bit more. See here that the Goldie blade work is a little bit cleaner, a little bit more precise. Not then, they hit a huge wave there. There's a lot more water flying up off the Isis boat. It's clearly rougher in the middle there where Isis are.
Well, if Goldie hold on and win, it'll be revenge for last year. Isis rather unexpectedly beat Goldie last year by only 7 seconds, and they came from behind to do it. And here are Goldie doing something similar.
Absolutely. A lot of stress is being attached to Gavin Stewart, who stroked the Isis crew last year and was hopefully going to do the same sort of thing for them this year. Cambridge have obviously got to hold off Gavin Stewart, do better than Goldie managed last year. But this year, Goldie are getting revenge and doing it the hard way, which is to row round the outside of the Surrey Bend and then to win a race round the last Barnes Bridge, Barnes Bend.
So the end of the reserve race now in sight. They'll have rowed 4 miles, 374 yards when they reach the finish.
There's some very erratic steering going on here in the Isis and Goldie race. Isis have actually cut in behind Goldie and changed station. Isis are now hugging the shore underneath the Middlesex bank. Goldie are carrying on. There was almost a bump. If they touched one another, that would have been a foul and an automatic disqualification. But Isis are making a last dash for the finish, trying to come through on the inside. There's nothing in the rules to prevent them doing this, providing they don't interfere with the Goldie boat, who are staying on their station. But it's still Goldie with some clear water. They have about 1/4 of a length of daylight between the crews. Goldie looking quite relaxed at this point, and I think Isis have done a last final fling.
Goldie have come across effectively and shut them out, haven't they?
Goldie now have got back inside them. And they're coming now to the last few strokes for a long, hard race. Goldie holding their form as they come into calmer water. There we are. Goldie from Isis by about a length.
So there's the first triumph of the day for Cambridge. The reserve crew, Goldie, have beaten Isis by about 1 length. And back here at Putney, pouring with rain now, and the wind trying very hard indeed to go from west to northwest. And if it does get into that northwest position and stay there, then the conditions at the start of this race are going to be murderous. Because with the northwest wind hitting against the tide and the boats at their fastest, obviously they go fastest at the off, the conditions then become very dangerous indeed. And it's getting darker and darker. Really is very ominous indeed now. So Cambridge there will not know, of course, that their reserve crew have won in a thrilling race. And these are the conditions at the other end of the course at Chiswick. And this is what they're going to be heading for. And the rain now is absolutely sheeting down. It really is horrible. And I don't know, will they get the race underway in these conditions, Chris? It's looking
I think
foul.
they will. I hope they don't have to try and start it in a squall like this. It really makes it virtually impossible for the stake boat boys who hold the stern of the boats to hold on to them. They'll just be blowing around in the wind.
Well, these conditions are as bad as, I don't know about you, because I can't remember them quite as bad as this.
They're certainly
for a
very,
long
very
time.
bad. I rode one boat race in 1973 rather like this, and there we see the stake boat boys who are bouncing around, and they're in a much bigger craft.
And the wind now definitely northwest. Well, at least they're not making heavy weather of it, but I'm afraid the boat race crews are going to. The conditions really are foul. And it's a miracle to me that anybody can row on the River Thames in conditions like this.
Remarkably, it isn't actually too rough along here yet, and the wind is trying to come round northerly, but it will make life extremely difficult after Hammersmith Bridge. If the wind actually blows any more from the north, we can expect very rough water along the start as well. Now, hopefully this will be a short score. We had a number of these yesterday. They were very, very severe. The intensity was quite appalling. And I don't think any rowing boat would have survived yesterday, but today, hopefully it won't be quite so bad.
You were saying, Chris, when we were watching the start of the ISIS Goldie race, that you thought the stake boats were rather too close together. In fact, they've now put them wider apart.
Yes, they've moved them, and that too is unusual, because traditionally, and indeed in breach of the rules, they're not actually supposed to move them at all. They're not meant to be moved after the toss. But I think they must have drifted in the crosswind. But quite clearly, it was impossible to start the boats in their original position, and they're now actually very well apart. And I think that'll actually rather favour the Surrey station, because they'll be protected in the crosswind.
Colin Moynihan, the umpire, was saying, of course, that he was prepared to make a few unofficial rules today in order to get the thing away safely. He said safety was paramount, and this clearly is part of it, isn't it? Getting
Absolutely.
the stake boats wider apart.
Yeah, the umpire has an absolute discretion in the boat race, and they have complete control of the race, and they can make decisions as they go along.
It's very interesting that Donald MacDonald, the Oxford president, chose Middlesex. He's the first president. MacDonald, the Oxford president, is the first man to choose Middlesex, having won the toss, since 1974.
Yes, it was a brave decision. I suspect he thought that there was going to be more northerly wind in this than there actually is. I know that the feeling is that if the water gets very rough off the start, then the Middlesex station is definitely the one to have. That was certainly my experience in 1973, where we were presented with Middlesex station, and it saved us when Oxford actually got waterlogged. I think also they expect Cambridge to be very strong in the middle of the race, and the Middlesex station will give them the start off the Middlesex Bend after the first 2 to 3 minutes.
Conditions here at Putney are so bad that, in fact, you can hardly see beyond the Fulham football ground as we look up towards Hammersmith Bridge.
And the water's definitely picking up.
And that gives you some idea. That's looking from Putney back towards Hammersmith. Now we move down towards Putney Bridge, and the stake boats are stationed some 400 feet above Putney Bridge. And Cambridge now rowing up to the stake boats.
After all the problems we've had this year, it seems that we're moving to some dramatic Wagnerian...
My word!
There is the Wagnerian climax, an enormous clap of thunder.
A huge flash of lightning, and then that enormous clap of thunder, which frightened the life out of me.
I think Harry and I feel very exposed, sitting as we do on top of the Barclays Bank boathouse. Closer perhaps to the gods.
You could actually hear the lightning crack then. Really rather nasty. Anyway, we're safe and sound, and I hope the crews are. And the water now here at Putney is very rough indeed. It's suddenly the white waves are coming up, and it's getting very, very choppy.
And we now have a fascinating balance, because Oxford have chosen the Middlesex station, and they're protecting themselves against just this sort of eventuality. They will be able to choose, if they wish to go right over the far side under the Middlesex wall. But at the moment, it looks as if the white water is blanketing the entire course. The sooner the umpire gets this race off, the better chance it has of surviving the first 2 to 3 minutes, I think.
I think Donald MacDonald, the Oxford president, must have some very good contacts upstairs to know that this weather was suddenly going to happen, and it was going to go northwest like this moments before the race would start. Extraordinary.
I think we have a squall here. The question is, how long is it actually going to last for?
In fact, the weather is brightening further up the course now. Well, now we hear that Colin Moynihan, the umpire, may be having a word with the two crews. In fact, the weather now, the squall has passed here, and the weather is brightening further up the course. It's clear now over Hammersmith Bridge, and looks quite reasonable up there. And the wind, in fact, has dropped slightly after that vicious squall and that thunderbolt. But the wind now very definitely northwest. Brighter and a touch calmer now, but you can see for yourself the state of the water. And at the speed they go from the off, that sort of water is very, very difficult to row through.
This is going to be very tricky. Both the crews have taken special precautions to try and keep the water out of the boats, and in the case of Cambridge, to try and pump it out once it actually gets in. But there's Oxford. Oxford have actually fitted special outriggers on their boat ever since their experience in 1973 when they got waterlogged. They fitted special lightweight aerofoil section riggers to try and get through this rough water. The problem with rowing boats is if you make them too light, they're not strong enough, but if you put a lot of metalwork on, it gets a lot of water in the boat.
Oxford rules, it says on that window, and inside there, everybody's happy enough. It's wet outside, but I suspect they're very nicely wet inside. So a dramatic overture to the 133rd University Boat Race from the Lightning and the Thunder. This is, in fact, the 158th anniversary of the first boat race, which was held in 1829, not here, but held in June at Henley. And it went off at just before 8 p.m. and Oxford won easily all those years ago. We're going to have a slow race today. I don't think there's any doubt about that, with the wind where it is and the conditions being what they are. And we may well have a 20-minute boat race here with the conditions as they are. Well, we've heard from up the course that the Goldie Cox said that it wasn't so much a race as a test of endurance. Conditions at the start, apparently, according to the Goldie Cox, were horrendous. Now, Chris, what's happening
Looking
here
down
at
at
the
the
start?
crews, it's quite clear that the stake boats have slipped, they've dragged. Now, this is going to lead to quite a substantial delay because they've got to pull back the Middlesex station. We can see that the Middlesex station with Oxford has floated a full boat length down the course. Now, clearly the crews have got to start in line. Indeed, they've got to start on the start mark, which is where Cambridge are at the moment. So now we've got to tow back that stake boat, and to do that, I think that Oxford will have to disconnect themselves so the stake boat can then be put back in place. This may take some few minutes, I'd have thought.
Well, this is turning out to be the most dramatic start to a race since that famous incident a few years ago when one of the crews collided with a moored boat. Do you remember that?
Yes, here they're in connection with the right moored boat, but that seems to be moving. This is a moored boat that's not meant to move.
Right. Well, we had a very close reserve race, and we might get another one here. The closest recent race was in 1980. Oxford won by canvas. That's about 6 feet. And another close one back in 1952. Oxford again then by canvas. And in 1949, Cambridge won by a mere quarter of a length. But it's not usual for such close finishes. The boat race over 4 1/4 miles, they tend to get a bit separated. And it's very hard, of course, for a crew behind, isn't it, to really come from behind.
Oh, it's very difficult, and the people should realise how very difficult it is actually to get two crews at that standard to be that close. I mentioned, I think, in previous years that a 10-second verdict actually puts the two crews within 1% of one another, and 10 seconds is actually quite a long way. It's over 3 lengths. So to get them very close when they're starting just as a group of individuals at each university, it's obviously very difficult to match them up.
So problems with the Oxford stake boat. At the start above Putney Bridge.
It's a nerve-wracking time, this, for the crews. They don't really like hanging around on the stake boats. The worst moment is the apprehension immediately before the go, and this prolongs it. But they seem to be gradually pulling the boat back. Cambridge are also, apart from being the lighter crew, are also the younger crew. The average age is only about 21. They've got a lot of experience in those young heads, but this is the sort of stress which no one would actually choose. Sitting on a boat race start is, without doubt, one of the most nerve-wracking. It certainly is on par with Olympic finals and things like that.
It's a miracle, really, isn't it, that Oxford, with all that trouble in January and February with the so-called mutiny, the Americans dropping out of the boat. I mean, they had a very powerful crew at that time, didn't they, until all that happened. To get themselves back into a reasonable, challenging position is really quite remarkable.
Yes, I think it says a great deal for the individuals themselves and also for the coach, Dan Topolsky, who has always been a great fighter, always a fighter.
Well, I hear that we ourselves have a few problems because that lightning bolt, in fact, struck one of our television towers here, one of our engineering towers, and that means now we're having problems getting pictures from the boats. So we've got a few problems, but bear with us. I've no doubt we shall bring you excellent pictures of this entire boat race. Well, they look as though they are getting into some sort of order again, Chris.
Yes, I think the boats look more or less level now, so I think the umpire will be preparing for the start. The crews are well apart now on the state boat, so there shouldn't be any steering problems. And both should have fair water down the first 2 minutes of the race.
We're now some 6 minutes late from the time they should have been off. Well, this is all part of boat race day scenes. Bands playing, people having a jolly time, despite the weather. And it's still a great day. I hear music playing. Cruising down the river, well, it would have to be, wouldn't it? Well, the stake boats, as Chris was saying, do now seem to be reasonably level. And now the two crews must get themselves in line and prepared. And hopefully we should get the boat race away.
So I think Oxford still have to go back a few feet. But in the meantime, the water opposite the boathouses has actually flattened off quite a lot, which will help the crews. Will certainly help Cambridge a little bit.
There's Colin Moynihan, the former Oxford Cox, winning Oxford Cox in '77, getting ready to umpire his first boat race.
Both crews will know how important it's going to be to go through Hammersmith Bridge first. So Oxford on the Middlesex station will be fighting hard to take advantage of that first bend, and Cambridge to protect their bend.
A flash of lightning again. We hear it somewhere over Chiswick. And the wind has dropped considerably, which is, we're all thankful for that. And it's turning again now, the wind. It's gone back to west-southwest. It was just during that very vicious squall that the wind went northwest. That's the famous Harrods Repository, one of the landmarks on the boat race course, just below Hammersmith Bridge. And things now seem to be somewhere near to getting this race off. Oxford have the Middlesex station. They will be rowing on the Fulham Wall side. And in fact, this race has been won off the Middlesex station for the last 2 years. Both times when the winning president won the toss and chose Surrey. Conditions now here at Putney, compared with 10 minutes ago, really quite good. And we hear now that Colin Moynihan, the umpire, is transferring from his own launch to the following Oxford launch. So clearly a problem with the umpire's launch to add to all the other troubles. And they will go at flag 4. The umpire shouting, go. And we shall have a constant check on the time for you in this boat race, all being well, if everything works. Now the race about to get underway. The 133rd University Boat Race. And they are off. And the great cheer goes up from the banks of the Thames. And there's a wide divergence of crews here. Extraordinary, Chris.
Yes, Oxford are already going for cover. They're going to look at, see if they can get the flatter water underneath the Middlesex shore. And there they hope that they may get the advantage of the Middlesex bend by rowing cleanly through calm water. They will lose the tide, but they'll actually have the advantage of smooth water.
And confirmation that the umpire's launch in fact did break down, and Moynihan transferred to the Oxford launch. And Oxford have gone right up under the Fulham wall.
And Cambridge are actually following them over. They're not so far. There must be a good 50 yards separating the two crews at the moment. But this is a tremendous gamble by the Oxford crew to get round this bend. They must try and get at least a length in front of Cambridge by the time they get to the end of the first mile.
And as they come past our commentary box, Oxford are up by only a foot or two. And in fact, it looks as though Cambridge may be pulling level with them.
I think so. They both went off at a similar rate of striking, taking the same sort of numbers of strokes. Looking now at Oxford. Giant Gavin Stewart stroking that boat along.
And even under the shelter of the Fulham wall, the conditions quite rough. And Oxford have pulled over right beside them now. And Oxford seem to be a fraction up.
Oxford seem to have about a third of a length. It will be Cambridge who will control the water after that bend, so Oxford have got to try and get some more. Otherwise Cambridge will prevent Oxford coming back into the tide. Oxford will therefore have to fight in the slack water.
And this first Middlesex bend is estimated to give it 2/3 of a length advantage.
That's about right. It's very, very approximate, these distances, but it's thought to be like that, depending on the actual steering. Oxford have nearly 3/4 of a length.
And from our overhead shot, we see the margin now almost a length. That's a good start by Oxford.
Good start. The gamble seems to have paid off so far. But I think they're moving now into smoother water, and they'll want to ease back into the middle of the river.
Because that's where the fastest current is.
The fastest current is to be found nearer the middle of the river. In fact, you take the ideal line, you flow slightly round the outside of the middle of a bend. At this stage, they're still well over to Middlesex.
They pass Craven Cottage, the home of Fulham Football Club. I wonder how many more boat races we should be saying that. Fulham playing Port Vale, kick-off 3 o'clock this afternoon. Cambridge crew, and you can see for yourself just how turbulent that water is, and oarsmanship, good oarsmanship, is going to be at a premium in these sort of conditions.
Cambridge are using walls which aren't made of wood. It's the first time this has ever been done in the boat race. We'll see here whether they're going to be an advantage or not.
It's important to remember that Cambridge have the more experienced oarsmen in the boat, but they are far the lighter crew.
They're lighter and also younger, but there's some very wise heads on those young bodies, and they will be quite happy at the moment as long as they don't drop back any further. It's very important they keep moving over the top of those waves.
Now they could at this point now be keeping Oxford out of the fast water, couldn't they?
At this stage they've certainly got the better of the tide, but Oxford are rowing cleanly. They seem to be both in control. They're matching each other for rate. They're both striking about 33, which is the stride rate which we've seen both crews use in practice.
Our first timing point will be the mile post. That'll be coming up quite shortly. I don't think there's much point in talking about records in these conditions, but just for interest's sake, the record to the mile post is 3 minutes and 31 seconds, so you'll be able to get a comparison from that.
And the crews are very much overlapping and also interlocking. Oxford trying to keep well away.
Well, you can see already, over 4.5 minutes, and here's an interesting development. The two crews in line abreast.
Now, Oxford are making a challenge to try and get back into the tide, and it's important that Cambridge don't let them move over in front of them, otherwise they'll get the cover of the Surrey Bend. Now you can see the Cambridge Cox responding, moving back inside them to try and hold his own water.
They just about had the clearance there to do that, didn't they, Oxford? Only just.
There was a moment there where Oxford had about a quarter of a length. You shouldn't, as a Cox, move over until you have more than that, but clearly the Oxford Cox is going to want to try and take all the advantages that he can. And there he's having a go again. He's edging over in front of Cambridge.
Andy Lovenberg, the Oxford Cox. And the milepost was reached in 4 minutes and 19 seconds. The distance between the two crews was 1 length. So a very interesting tactical race going on here between these two crews, with Oxford now, with some clearance between themselves and Cambridge, are now able to move over and take Cambridge's water.
Oxford spurted as they came past the milepost and raised the number of strokes they were taking a minute by some 2 strokes a minute. They went up to over 34.5, and they've broken clear of Cambridge. Cambridge are now rowing behind them, and really Cambridge need to get back on terms at this point so that they can put pressure on Oxford through Hammersmith Bridge. And there's Oxford fighting to keep in front, fighting to keep that advantage over Cambridge as they come on to the Surrey Bend.
Now, once they've shot Hammersmith Bridge, I suspect the conditions are going to be rather worse than they are at this moment, because then the wind has dropped considerably, but what wind there is will then be head-on against the tide and against them.
And we're looking down there at a lead of about 1.5 lengths, and Cambridge must make an effort here to get on terms. They've got to take advantage of the Surrey Bend. At the moment, they're not in a position to do so.
This is an amazing start, in fact, by Oxford, isn't it?
Yes, so they've gambled, and it's come off magnificently. They've got exactly what they want, which is control of the Surrey Bend.
And you can see for yourself Hammersmith Bridge, which celebrates its 100th anniversary this year. There'll be all sorts of celebrations in June to mark that occasion. The record at Hammersmith Bridge is 6 minutes and 24, and you can see for yourself they've already been occupied for more than 7 minutes, and they're not quite there yet.
Oxford rowing cleanly, seem to be well in control at this point.
And Cambridge now really do have a big problem on their hands, because they've lost the advantage of the Surrey Bend, because Oxford have taken their water. And they reach Hammersmith Bridge, built in 1887, in the 50th year of Victoria's reign.
Oxford have a lead of approximately 1.75 lengths.
It's a big lead at this stage of the race, Chris.
It's definitely a big lead, and Cambridge are looking for shelter. You see them edging over already to try and get under that Surrey Bend, and they're closing on Oxford. That daylight, the clear water between the crews is reduced. There's perhaps a length between the crews now, and what we must be wondering is how much did it take out of the Oxford crew to get to Hammersmith? The Cambridge crew have been well prepared to row the whole way through this race, and we've got to see whether they've got the strength and experience to row round this Surrey Bend. 2 of the boys have been quite seriously ill. Garwan at 7 and Peel at 6 both had chicken pox, and it kept them out of the boat for more than a fortnight. It's not ideal preparation for an endurance race like this. This has all the makings of being a major challenge.
And we have the official time at Hammersmith Bridge. Oxford got there in 7 minutes and 40 seconds. They were leading by 7 seconds. A very slow race. And the light dapples the water as we look down on these 2 crews, with Oxford now leading by, well, 1.75 lengths, certainly.
Yes, and they responded to Cambridge's attack, and they managed to pull out a bit more clear daylight. But there's some more rough water to come.
Well, if Dan Topolsky has got this crew into this sort of condition after all the trouble they've had, it really is a remarkable achievement.
It'll be quite remarkable. He's talked about retirement after this year. What a way to retire that would be.
Well, it's not over yet, and the dark blues are ahead, but it looks to me as though Cambridge may be making a spurt again here.
Cambridge is still trying to hold on to that inside of the bend. They're slightly inside Oxford, but they are, in effect, one in front of the other. And that isn't going to give Cambridge any of the advantage that they need.
We're in Chiswick Reach now. When they reach Chiswick 8, that's approximately halfway. There's the great flotilla that follows this race every year, throwing up swirling waves as they go by.
Certainly gives some indication of the speed that these crews are travelling at. Looking at 15, 17 miles an hour.
And the distance between the two crews now seems to be in the nature of 2 lengths, perhaps even a little more.
And this has been a major upset. I think very few of the pundits would have expected this at this stage. But Oxford rowing well and in control.
And the Oxford Cox looks back over his shoulder just to see how much lead he's got. And it's a useful lead at this stage of the race, roughly halfway.
So apart from the appalling conditions into which these crews are fighting their way, the physical effort these boys make is quite enormous. Each stroke they pull, they're trying to do the equivalent of lifting a good sack of potatoes from their feet to your neck. 50 pounds every time they pull.
And Oxford seem to be pulling out rather more of a lead now. 9 pounds a man heavier, remember. That may be telling. But it's the quality of the oarsmanship that's got them through that early part of the race that seems to me so astounding.
I think they obviously made the right tactical decision off the start. And they got through off the mile, and here they are, comfortably in front. It's so much easier to row with a 2-length advantage. There's a lot of pressure on those young heads of Cambridge. It's probably the best rowing we've ever seen from Oxford while they've been up here. They've been getting better all the time.
Well, of course, they can't see the end of the race, but we can from our overhead shot. And you can see for yourself Barnes Bridge there in the distance. That's where the Surrey Bend, where the Middlesex Bend takes over again after the long Surrey Bend. And the Surrey Bend now for these crews running out. And so Cambridge have a problem now. Oxford presumably now will make for the other side and keep themselves in advantage.
And Oxford seem to have about 3 lengths now, which really does create a very serious problem for Cambridge. To cover that sort of distance will require a phenomenal spurt.
A nice position to be in. You can just pace yourself now, can't you, compared with the other crew that you can see.
Indeed, 2 lengths of clear water is a very comfortable amount. Gavin Stewart, the Oxford stroke, looks like repeating the remarkable achievement of last year.
And we have the official time at Chiswick Steps, which is the 3rd timing point, and Oxford reached the Chiswick Steps in 12 minutes and 15 seconds, which is precisely 2 minutes slower than the record time to there. Cambridge got there in 12:25, so there was 10 seconds between the two crews at Chiswick Steps.
And this is probably the reverse of what most people expected, so this is a most remarkable upset.
It's a good comeback after having been defeated last year after those 10 wonderful years for Oxford.
Indeed, and it's against what a background, too, of all the problems that Oxford have had in their run-up to this race. One wonders what sort of crew they might have had. It's always a question of what might have been, but this, too, is a good Oxford crew.
And a very interesting first boat race for the new sponsors, Beefeaters Gin, who are putting £330,000 into this race over the next 3 years, and I don't think they'll be too disappointed with what they're getting today. It's been very dramatic.
Indeed.
Now we look back from Lonsdale Road, one of our camera points, as this great armada comes towards us, led by these two fine crews, and Oxford particularly here, really putting on a show for us in this 133rd boat race. What's that huge bottle in the background there? Am I seeing things? No, I don't think I am. Oxford moving very steadily, their eyes on the following crew, making their way home to what now seems inevitable victory. Now we can give the boys a plug as we watch them at Bow, Hugh Pelham. At 2, the American Peter Gish. At 3, Tony Ward. 4, Paul Gleason, who was the stroke at one time. At 5, Richard Howell. That's Gleason there, 5, Richard Howell. And then at 6, the president, who must be well pleased with the way things are going, 31-year-old Donald MacDonald. At 7, Tom Cadou Hudson, former London University oarsman. And the giant stroke, 6 feet 8, Gavin Stewart, 16.5 stone.
I think Richard Howell must be very pleased, though we have a man who was overlooked by Cambridge and finds himself at Oxford in a winning blue boat.
Amazing to think that it's only a week since this crew was virtually ripped apart and put into different seats. And the whole thing's shaken up, and now they're rowing to victory in the boat race.
Indeed, on the form, they'd had a very rough first week on the Tideway, losing to a number of good Tideway crews, Imperial College, then Tideway Scullers, whereas Cambridge took on the best. They took on the national squad, and then the Italian composition, which is coming for the head this afternoon, and did very well against both. Very few would have expected this.
And now the crews must head for the central span of Barnesbridge. 13:57 is the record time to Barnesbridge. You can see for yourself from our clock just how much slower this time is today.
Interestingly enough, Oxford are continuing to rate higher than Cambridge throughout this race. They've been generally 1 stroke a minute higher, which one wouldn't expect to see in a crew with such a commanding lead as this has got.
3/4 of a mile to go. Oxford looking so comfortable, it all looks so easy now. But those opening moments of this race must have been very difficult indeed for both these crews. And Cambridge, all hope now, I think, gone. Nothing but defeat, staring them in the face, but they still have to pull to the finish.
This is going to be a bit of lesson for the young men. So hard to come with high expectations, find them shattered in such a way.
The official time at Barnesbridge, Oxford 16 minutes and 27 seconds. Cambridge 16 minutes and 39 seconds, so they've dropped another 2 seconds behind between Chiswick Steps and Barnesbridge.
The boat race is very much a race for the opportunist, and we've seen that classically today, how Oxford saw an opportunity and took it. The conventional racing crews, where you have still water and lanes where you can't move from side to side, it's rather more clear-cut. But here, it's for quick thinking, coordination between cox and crew, and Oxford have found that.
So Oxford now heading for their 11th win in 12 years. Cambridge, I think, had been the favourites all the way through the build-up to the race, hadn't they, Chris?
Well, they certainly have since the dropout with the Americans. Before that time, I think most people fancied the Oxford chances with so much international experience which the Americans offered. But they've shown that they can do it regardless. Cambridge have had to rely on essentially a domestically produced crew all the way through, but they've got some very talented youngsters, though today has not been their day.
It's the old story, isn't it, of the heavier crew taking over. 9 pounds a man, it's obviously told.
Yes, it has, but I think it had less to do with weight here than just the way they were rowing. I think the quality of Oxford rowing has been good.
And now we look back towards the 2 crews as they come towards the finish at Mortlake Brewery. Some three lengths perhaps between them.
Yes, and they're making...
which is not a huge margin, you were saying earlier.
No, it's not. Again, we're talking about a sort of 1% margin, but they're rowing well over water that looks somewhat flatter than we saw when we saw the Isis Goldie race half an hour ago. It's extremely difficult to control one of these boats. They're some 50 feet long, only about a foot to 2 feet wide. And you're using those 12.5-foot oars to balance them. It requires complete precision and great lightness of touch to do just that.
And so, we're looking at one of the most remarkable stories that the boat race has thrown up in recent years. Here's a crew that had mutiny on their hands only a couple of months ago. They were apparently seen to have no chance at that point as they had to reorganize, put new men into the boat. And yet here today, Oxford are coming home to victory in the 133rd University Boat Race, and they're winning by some 3 lengths as the flag goes down, and Oxford have won. They've overcome all those extraordinary difficulties, and how happy they are, and can you blame them? And Cambridge pulling rather disconsolately, as you would expect. The more experienced crew, much the lighter crew, but they've been, I'm afraid, quite soundly trounced today by Oxford.
Absolutely, it was a remarkable victory by Oxford. I imagine in the beginning of the race they even must have had doubts about themselves. It's not good to go into a race having doubts. Here they have shown what they're capable of. A great achievement by Oxford. And most of these Oxford oarsmen will be available again next year, so Oxford must be very happy today.
Not good news for Cambridge, Chris.
I'm afraid not good news for Cambridge, speaking as a Cambridge man.
Oh, you had 4 good years. Chris Bailey, who's been sitting alongside me, one of the great Cambridge oarsmen of all time, was successful in 4 boat races. Only one other Cambridge man has ever done that.
One other thing this Cambridge victory, this Oxford victory has prevented was a complete whitewash in all the rowing events at the universities. Cambridge was successful in the women's and lightweights event and the Isis and Goldie race, but not in the one that really matters.
The official time for Oxford, 19 minutes and 59 seconds. Just the 1 second inside 20 minutes, and that's the slowest race since 1979, when Oxford won in 20 minutes, 33 seconds. Cambridge came home in 20 minutes and 11 seconds, just 12 seconds behind. And our overhead shot shows you what the scene is at the finish. Great jubilation now, of course, for Oxford when they come ashore. Waving to friends and relations down there at Chiswick. And a truly magnificent performance behind them, and they're still celebrating, punching the air. Great triumph for Gavin Stewart, the stroke, the 6'8", 16.5 stone man. The heaviest and tallest man ever to row in the boat race. There he is. Victory now is his. And what a look of satisfaction they have on their faces. A week ago, you would have thought that was impossible. So the old race has produced yet more drama. Year after year it happens. And it is one of the great national events in sport, and proved itself again today to be one of the most dramatic.
I think that's why people still continue to be interested. You never know what it's going to throw up. It is a great tradition, but it's also a tradition that's never stood still. It always continues to bring out the best in the competitors. It's more than can be said of some of our sporting events.
Be interested to see whether there's very much water in those boats. Probably not.
Probably not too much. We'll see when they turn the boats over.
Andy Lobenberg, the winning Cox. Coxed Isis to victory last year, and Stewart stroked Isis to victory last year, and now they've done it in the main race. Hoisted ashore in triumph. Wonderful scenes. The old mascot that was on the Cox's back came good. Go for it, it said, and they went for it, and they got it. It truly is one of the most remarkable victories of recent years, and the champagne is bubbling already.
Gavin, many congratulations. What sort of race was it?
A very long one.
How bad were the conditions in the end?
They were awful up until about Harrods, and then it wasn't nearly so bad.
And what about your own role? Were you happy to be moved in the boat?
Well, I mean, it seemed to make it go faster, so, you know, I just do what I'm told. Or try to, you know.
And has the whole thing turned out to be a surprise to you, or have you really believed you could win?
The last few days we believed we had a shot. It's been going better and better, and it's been getting sharper and sharper, more alive. And everybody wanted it really badly, which makes a difference as well.
And winning the toss was important?
I think it was a little bit in the shelter, but, you know, I mean, we're just glad we won. It's a difficult race to analyse because of conditions and because it depends on so much else. Yeah. But, I mean, it's just great. I can't believe it's happened to me 2 years running.
Well done. Congratulations.
Thank you.
The stroke of the winning boat, Gavin Stewart. Well, one must spare a thought at this point for the losing crew. But meanwhile, I think we may be able to have a word with the president of Oxford, the oldest man ever to row in the boat race, 31-year-old Donald MacDonald.
Donald, many congratulations. I guess that is perhaps the most satisfying race of your whole career.
It certainly is, yes.
After all the tribulations this year?
Yeah, it's wonderful. It's a fairy tale.
Did you actually go on to the river feeling you had a point to prove?
No, I didn't, as a matter of fact. No, it was just this crew wanting to win this particular race.
How much of a disruption was all the trouble during the last couple of months?
Well, when it was happening, it was a tremendous disruption, as you all probably were aware at the time. But it's a tremendous tribute, I think, to all 9 people in the boat that they came through it, because everybody went through a pretty bad time. And as the weeks drew near, in fact, this last fortnight, especially this last week, everything came together very, very well.
How important was it winning the toss?
I think it was actually quite important on a day like this. It enabled us to get quickly into the slightly better water, to get the first bend, which was important to us because we knew that they had a slightly better stride, and if we could still be with them, that they'd be rattled.
And you had to have 2 goes at getting in front of them, didn't you?
Yes, we caught a monster crab. I don't know if you all saw it. A stroke side blade got caught, and they saw this, did a big move, very nearly got level.
And what about the changes in the order? Were they critical in the end?
I think they probably were, actually, yes. We moved the middle 4 into the stern, which put all the power, significantly the major power in the stern pair, Tom and Gavin, and that just drove us along, particularly on a day like this. You just need muscle. But
all the fears about sinking conditions were not borne out?
No, which astonished me. I, at one stage, did think we were going to go because the water was just lapping in. It was looking bad.
Can I just ask you to turn your head that way a bit? Looks suspiciously like lipstick on there.
I'm afraid it is, yes.
Anyway, many congratulations.
Great, thank you very much.
Well, the president of Oxford, Donald MacDonald, made a shrewd move when he won the toss and chose Middlesex, and all the drama of this race occurred in the opening stages. So let's look again now at how the 133rd boat race opened up. So this was the move off the stake boats, Oxford on this side, on the Middlesex side, making immediately for the shelter of the Fulham Wall. And this was a tactic that paid off. And Cambridge, in fact, Chris, were a little slow to respond to that, weren't they?
Yes, I think here Cambridge weren't really in control of what they were doing. They decided to follow Oxford, but too late. Really, you either have to make a decision and go over, or you set off down the middle station and hold it. At this point, Cambridge was still holding their normal station, and Oxford had actually made the protection of the wall, so at that stage they were going to start to get flat water. And it was shortly after that Cambridge moved over, and here come Cambridge moving over to join them, but by this time, of course, they actually had to chase them, and that's never a psychologically sensible and strong thing to do. And it gave Oxford perhaps a 3/4 length lead in the first minute and a half.
I can't remember seeing a crew so close to the Fulham Wall at the start of a race before.
No, not in recent years at all. Certainly in 1973 we moved over, but not as closely as that. And Oxford went right under the wall, and it paid off. You can see how much water's flying over the Cambridge boat. Look at the waves breaking over the back of the bowman, whereas Oxford are comparatively clear. There's no water breaking over their boat. You still see it. At this point, Cambridge seem to be on a collision course. They straightened up at this point. There wasn't actually very much to choose between them, but I suspect that it took a great deal out of Cambridge to keep their boat actually on those terms.
Yes, they must have covered a lot more distance than Oxford in those that opening half mile, sir.
Now that's, in physiological terms, that's always the problem, that if you use a great deal of energy in the first part of this course, that you pay a horrendous penalty for it later on. It's a race that has to be very well timed, and I suspect the nervousness of the moment and the need to get back on terms played quite a part in their inability to respond to Oxford's later moves.
Again here, Cambridge converging very closely indeed. Those blades are almost touching.
Well, you know, I think Andy Lodenberg, the Oxford cock, steered extremely well. He kept Oxford out in the water which they could manage and pushed Cambridge out into water which was that much rougher, and it made it so much harder for Cambridge. That is tactically exactly the right thing to do in this water.
I think this is the point, isn't it, where Oxford began to move over again towards Cambridge.
Absolutely. I think it's very interesting because it's a mirror of the sort of last race that I had in 1973, where we did very much the same sort of thing to Oxford, and I expect Dan is smiling wryly because on that occasion Oxford got very waterlogged.
And this was the point at which they came level with the Fulham football ground, about 3/4 of a length in it, but Oxford now beginning to move back out towards the centre of the river. And there was an interesting little point here, I think, where they almost transgressed, didn't they, Oxford, at this point?
Yes, they came very close towards Cambridge. At that point, Cambridge was still continuing on the middle line, to which they're quite entitled. But Oxford were trying to return to their normal station.
So there we are, the opening stages of this dramatic boat race, but Oxford were in command, and they never lost it from this point.
So, Oxford win the boat race, no sinkings, thankfully, and we'll have a little more fun from the river later on this afternoon with the head of the river, with 400-plus crews racing back downriver. They don't all start at once, you'll be pleased to note. We've also, of course, got Rugby League for you this afternoon. Halifax against Widnes to see who plays St Helens in the Challenge Cup final in May. There's racing from Newbury. Football Focus coming up very shortly too. But now it's news time, and Jan Leeming.